make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
So in any case, he became kind of a heroic martyr. And from that point on, it became obvious that either he dies or Putin dies first. And the regime apparently, even though they, essentially silenced him and towards the end sent him to above the Arctic Circle, they essentially it was a judicial murder.
Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
And returning to the show is Dr. Leon Aron. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He studies Russian domestic and foreign policy, U.S. Russia relations, and the economic, social, I'll figure out the English language here soon enough, and cultural aspects of Russia's post-Soviet evolution. So welcome back to the show, Dr. Leon.
I'm glad to be here.
What's interesting. So preparing for the show, I went back to the last time you were here, and the first sentence of the show description said this. It said, "This week, the government is on the verge of a government shutdown, and many members of Congress have made their intentions clear about whether or not they will support funding for Ukraine." Like, that was the first sentence of the show description. Doesn't seem like much has changed, has it?
As Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So here we are again, in the same predicament. And I am so glad you're back because, I wanted to chat with somebody that was much smarter about this stuff than I was, about some recent developments that occurred in Russia. Probably the most prominent is the death of Alexei Navalny. So at the time of us recording, there was a funeral that just occurred for him. Tons of people that came out. He was this really sort of larger than life type of character, but I'm not going to try to explain who he was. I'm going to kind of leave that to the expert. So who was Alexei Navalny?
Well, Alexei Navalny started as an anti-corruption fighter, made a few sensational films that reveal the ill-gotten gain of Putin and those around him. The last one was unbelievable. It was essentially showing a palace on the Black Sea with all of him, skating rink, hockey rink, all sorts of pole dancing room. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And had millions of views. But after that, he grew into more like a civil rights leader or political rights leader. He led 100,000 demonstrations very close to the Red Square in Moscow in winter of 2011-2012, and several other large meetings, which actually now seemed like a different era, because nothing of the kind would ever be tolerated by the Putin regime. In fact, we have a pretty good idea that those who come to those to the funeral, and of course this is a wonderful outpouring of devotion to Navalny, but it's also a heroic act because everybody, they clearly identified secret policemen who walk around and take photos, and probably with the Face IDs technology borrowed from China or licensed from China, they could then track those people. So he grew up into a heroic figure, and there are several reasons for that. One of which is the regime's own fault, because Putin tried to poison him. and he was, miraculously saved. It happened on a flight from one of the provinces, and quickly he was transferred to a German hospital where they resuscitated him essentially. Then he did something that obviously is going to stay in the annals of history, which is that he returned to Russia knowing full well that he would be arrested. Formally at that time, for violating his suspended sentence agreement, sentence conditions, which is that he was supposed to come and be registered in the police, with the police, I forgot, every week, every 2 weeks. Well, of course he couldn't because he was nearly dead. He came back and they arrested him. And as the condition, of course, essentially he violated his bail. And he was to serve 11 years. Then this past August, they added another 19 years to his sentence. And by the way, I have to tell you, these sentences, I mean, I grew up in the Soviet Union. If you were a spy, the most you could get is 15 years. So Navalny ended up with 30 years. And I must say that there's another political rights leader and a close friend of mine, Vladimir Putin, who is serving 25 years. I mean, we're here to essentially gulag days of Stalin, as far as that is concerned. So in any case, he became kind of a heroic martyr. And from that point on, it became obvious that either he dies or Putin dies first. And the regime apparently, even though they essentially silenced him and towards the end sent him to above the Arctic Circle, they essentially slowly, it was a judicial murder.
So when we say it was a judicial murder, which I hear you in that, but help us understand what exactly that means.
Okay.
Like, was it the jail cell? We were reading and preparing for this, looked at some of the articles, like the Shizo, or how
exactly.
Shizo, okay.
I was going to talk about, yeah.
Yes, please talk to us about what that is.
The EU established that in most Russian prisons, normal prisons, right? They amounted to torture. I mean, to the international definition of torture. Shizo, which is a Russian, it's a compound word, complex word, meaning penal cell. So you go there and you get, if you're lucky, you get a cold meal once a day. There's always light. There's always loud music. You cannot. So here, get this. You get up in the morning, or they wake you up, whatever, 6 a.m. There's a folded bed. So the bed gets back chained to the wall, and you are not allowed to sit on the floor. Every time you sit on the floor, they always watch you. There's a camera. They come in and they lift you and probably beat you up in the process. So in essence, you have to stay on your feet until they unchain the bed. 12, 13 hours later. It's cold. You're not allowed the phone. You're not allowed anything to write with. You're not allowed to read anything. In that penal cell, Navalny was 27 times. So you can imagine, I mean, this is how much can you take? And so essentially, they exhausted him and he died.
I guess like my big question is like, why was he such a threat? I mean, he's just one man, right? So like, what's the big deal? Like why? And then maybe the second follow question is, why didn't they just like kill him? I mean, I know they tried, right? So with using Novichok or whatever, and so why didn't they just try again? Like, do they just give up?
Well, so on the first question, and that's of course the key issue here. So, you look at those public opinion polls and you listen to Putin's State of Russia speech, which I hope we get to last week. And everything is hunky-dory. I mean, everything is wonderful. He's beloved by the people. People love the war in Ukraine. Everything is fine. Well, if everything is fine, then what are you afraid of? So let him be. I made a point in something that I wrote actually immediately after I learned about his death, that you take regimes like the Soviet Union or South Africa when it was an apartheid regime, and they had enough confidence to keep their key opponents, such as Andrei Sakharov in the Soviet Union and Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Sakharov was under house arrest, Mandela was in prison, but they didn't kill them. And the paradox here is that apparently they were more confident than the Putin regime. So in other words, they were confident enough to keep them, jailed and isolated, but alive. So the next question is, why didn't they kill them again? Well, I think that it was one of those things where the moment he was arrested, when he returned from Germany, essentially Putin pronounced a death sentence on him, and the rest was up to the jail authorities. And I'm sure the Kremlin checked with them, and how he's doing. Do you think how long do you think how long before he dies? Basically, I mean, are you doing enough there? So why create kind of an additional kind of irritant, a more spectacular martyrdom than just let him kind of quietly die, which of course didn't work, because as we could see, he still got his martyrdom and he still is a national hero.
So they kept Navalny in this very, high security penal colony. Is that the same place that they're keeping the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan, or would he be held somewhere else?
No. Much better conditions for Ivan Gershkovich. Much better.
Oh,
First of all, he's in Moscow. Secondly, he is in what, by Russian standards, is a probably upscale prison. 3 meals a day, probably a warm cell. Navalny reported all sorts of psychological pressure. I remember reading, for example, that he said, there are 2 people here. I don't know who they are, but they follow me everywhere, like 2 steps behind. Can you imagine? I mean, every moment of your waking life. And I guess the idea there was that he'll lose it and he'll start, fighting them or beating them, and they beat him back. In any case, and I'm sure this was not just an isolated fact. I'm sure they invented other means of psychological torture.
So I want to think about the funeral for a moment here. So a large gathering at this funeral, a show out for Navalny, and you had mentioned kind of the bravery it took to attend this funeral. Kind of go into that a little bit more. Like, do you think they have everyone that attended that funeral, their name, their location, all of that? I mean, what's the extent to which the danger, at least, that someone put themselves in by attending this funeral?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope that even with the facial recognition cameras and facial recognition technology that their Chinese comrades gave them, I don't think they could have. I mean, I think they didn't expect this type of turnout. So I don't think they they recorded everyone. Although, I don't know. I mean, for example, if you by the way, my friends from Moscow sent me photos, and it appeared that along the route, all the roofs had snipers on them.
Oh my God.
I don't know what they exactly expected, but apparently there were, I saw the photos. Somebody was there, but that's what I was told. And so, what if that facial recognition works on the crowd? In other words, you have a camera, I'm not filming you as I'm standing next to you, but I'm filming you from above. Who knows what kind of manipulation of the images or how it's that done. In any case, a good number of them are probably on the record now, and we'll have to see what they'll do to them. People braved all sorts of things. For example, I don't know if you saw, there was a very explicit video of a young woman who was being arrested for trying to put the flowers on a memorial site. And it just, I think at this point, they can't just run into the crowd and start pulling people out because there are too many of them. But I think many of them are going to pay for this. The truth is that not only they were there to mourn Navalny, but we heard what they said. Putin is a murderer, Navalny is a hero, a no to the war. So all of this, so just as those type of heroes tend to do, they become, in a sense, even more dangerous to the regime after they die.
I mean, what's the calculation from the Putin regime? I mean, to even allow this to happen. I mean, I'm sure that there would be sort of a groundswell, people would be upset, but then, give it a couple of weeks and then it would just sort of die down. I mean, was there that much pressure to actually have this memorial service?
It is a bit of speculation. You're absolutely right. Let's not forget that they're going to have the national election. Well, presidential so-called election in big inverted commas and big quotation marks. And I think in the end, I'm sure there was a bit of a tizzy in the Kremlin. So the idea was either to essentially start arresting people by 100 and beating them up and shoving them into police buses, or like you said, before Putin's election. Now, remember, this is an interesting, the election, in the so-called election, presidential election, of course, is not about the election. There's no choice. But it is to demonstrate, basically what it boils down to. It is to demonstrate, both on the local and the national level, the efficiency of the repressive apparatus. In other words, this region delivers 94% for Putin. That region delivers, by the way, the norm now, I believe that the latest I heard, is about secure 70% turnout. And of that 70% turnout, secure 85, 88% for Putin. That's without cheating. That's without cheating. So that's what this election is all about, to show how effective the regime is in delivering support for Putin. And I think the idea was that it probably, kind of mars it, it distracts, it subtracts from the triumph of this kind of election, to have essentially battling, men, women, and children in the crowd. And I think in the end, they decided, pretty much like you said, all right, let them have it. And it's still about, let's see, today's the 4th. It's still about 10 days to the election. It will die down, and we'll have our triumph.
So here's the, when I was thinking about this and even hearing you talk.
Excuse me, I am going to increase my sound here. I'm not hearing you. Okay, got it.
That's fine. So, yeah, when I was thinking about this and hearing you talk, one of my questions is like, so the State of the Union, is that, I mean, I guess State of the Nation, whatever they call it,
Right.
in Russia, when he gave this address and he's making these threatening comments against the West, it feels like, and even threatening the use of nuclear weapons against NATO countries if the West continues to help or send aid or, or send forces, I guess, to defend Ukraine from a Russian victory. Number one, how seriously do you take that? And what else about the State of the Union or State of the Nation address stuck out to you that you would want to bring to our attention?
So for your listeners and viewers who want more, I just did a piece about that in the New York Post. It was published today. You're absolutely right. There were two interesting parts. I mean, it's all blather, it's all, gobbledygook, it's all kind of macho preening and astounding hypocrisy and barefaced lies. I mean, this is what that address is. So let me start with the smaller one, actually, which got more attention. And that is that Putin, literally, you could see his speechwriters just basically gave him that piece of paper as he was going to the podium. Hey, Macron said that they might send troops.
Yeah.
Okay, you say something about it. And he did. And he did. But that was not really new. In other words, he always, I recorded a lot of it in my recent book. If you look at chapter 4, which is called Worshipping the Nukes, I listed some of those occasions and with details. Every time NATO, sneezes, he tells his subjects, and they're not citizens, they're subjects. He tells them, Russia is in mortal danger. This is it. But don't worry, we have nuclear weapons. So this is precisely what he said about, it's an expected reply. What I really found interesting and very disturbing is something that generally for some reason got overlooked. And Putin said, look, America wants us to stay within the strategic arms control. As you remember, Obama, Medvedev, 2011, and it's called New START. Well, New START expires in 2 years. And so Putin says, they want us to stay in this, negotiate arms control agreements with them while look what they're doing in Ukraine, right? And incidentally, literally speaking, he did not mention Ukraine, but he didn't have to, because the Kremlin narrative from the very beginning was it's a proxy war with the United States. NATO, but primarily the United States. And then he said something that I found very interesting and alarming. He said, no, we will not discuss anymore any strategic nuclear arms control unless we simultaneously address the issues directly impacting Russian national security. He did not have to mention Ukraine, but it's obvious. So what I found alarming here is that, it's not just trying to scare them. He's been brandishing his nukes forever. Here he specifically said, I'm essentially exiting from the arms control agreement unless you help me in Ukraine. Now, towards the end, I extrapolated. The truly scary implication here is this, and we probably will touch on that. So he's sinking deeper and deeper in this quagmire of Ukraine. We can talk about why and how. And so he needs to get out, but he cannot get out without a victory, or at least some semblance of victory. He cannot go back to his countrymen And by one estimate, he loses 50,000 soldiers in Ukraine every 6 months. He probably by now lost about 300,000 dead or wounded. So he cannot go there and say, "Oops, I made a mistake. Don't worry about it. I made a mistake." No, that's a political suicide. Nor, and we'll see, I mean, this year will be decisive in that regard. He'll try to win on the battlefield, but so long as the West stops dithering and keeps Ukraine in the fight, he's not going to secure a victory on the battlefield. So what to do? Well, why don't we, it's kind of a Hail Mary here, why don't we scare the West into not just stopping to help Ukraine, but helping me get out. Helping me get out, peace with honor, if you still remember that Chamberlain saying. So extrapolating from that, and again, I had that in the last chapter of my book, what if, I mean, obviously the Biden administration is going to say, "Oops, okay, we have to stop Ukraine because Putin is going to stop complying with the arms control agreement." It's scary, but it's not big enough. Well, what if he ups the ante? And what if he indeed attacks a smaller NATO member country? And I have a detailed scenario in my book, on my most recent book, Riding the Tiger. Most likely Estonia, Latvia, because up to a quarter of their population is ethnic Russians. And not only they're ethnic Russians, but they're, from his point of view, very conveniently, the Russian population is very conveniently located in the border areas with Russia. So what if he, I'm not saying he's going to conquer, Estonia, Latvia. He could have a lightning attack, 3-4 days, grab those parts of land, and claim what he claimed in Donbass and Luhansk. Okay, we're helping our compatriots. This is our territory. And when the those are NATO members, unlike Ukraine. So the U.S. is bound by Article 5 of the NATO Charter, to come to assistance of any NATO member who is attacked. And I described why even now there aren't enough forces on the ground. So it will take a few days to collect the forces, introduce the charter, blah. By then, Putin would say, okay, this is part of the territory of the Russian Federation. And I cite that would be 10 years ago, in December of 2014, he signed the latest Russian military doctrine, which states that even in the case of a conventional conflict, not nuclear, but conventional, Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons if it is assessed that there is a direct threat to the very existence of the state. Well, who is going to judge if there's one guy, one person who would decide the nature of the threat? And so here he puts NATO, he gives us, a ghastly choice. You either surrender or you threaten, or you basically call his bluff and see if he's going to start a nuclear war, right? What Putin is going to say at this point is that, okay, all right, this is madness, let's stop. Why don't we have a comprehensive settlement? Meaning, we'll resolve this issue, but we also resolve the Ukraine issue. And it is not like, he's threatening with exiting from the arms control agreement. He is threatening with a nuclear war. And that would be a very, very tough nut for the West to crack. And so again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm extrapolating wrongly. But what I found very interesting is that it's not just sort of, brandishing his nukes in general, trying to scare the West. It's explicitly linking a threat. It's not yet a nuclear war, but it's explicitly linking a step towards a nuclear war, because you're exiting from the arms control agreement. It becomes uncontrolled. You can't monitor each other's nuclear development. You cannot monitor, who knows? He's going to start, maybe he's going to start testing nuclear weapons. Who knows? And because we don't have the arms control agreement, we cannot monitor them. We cannot see where those, missiles are flying and so on and so forth. So this is what I found the most disturbing about that oration. It's actually called President's Address to the National Assembly. It's an annual address.
Wow, that's really sobering, and it it's like, I'm not sure if I should start saving my money, being that Social Security.
Or the opposite, just spend whatever you have now. Go to Rio.
I know. I mean, that is so what.
Buy yourself, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just go crazy. Just buy myself everything I wanted. You buy myself the Ferrari I've always
That's
wanted.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
The Harley.
How are you talking? Drive around a bit.
Oh my gosh! I want to ask you about something that I feel like kind of got lost in the news a little bit, and that's about like sort of the Moldova, Transnistria. I think I said that right. Transnistria.
Yeah.
And like the Russia connection. Can you talk a little bit about why are they asking for protection and whatnot?
So this is yet another. I mean, they've been there since the fall of the Soviet Union, and what Transnistria is that's a part of Moldova where they had 14th Army. I think it's still there, Russian Army, and for some reason, and I don't want to go into details. It's largely populated by ethnic Russians, and so they declared a separate republic. It's a tiny place. It's completely. I mean, basically, it exists as a crime capital or contraband. I mean, all the contraband out of Moldova through to Moldova to Ukraine. By the way, also goes through Transnistria, a completely mafiosi regime. So periodically things flared up, but why now? Well, because, and again, this is completely inspired. I mean, there was a phone call from the Kremlin that they wouldn't do anything on their own. So what happened here was, if you look at the geography, they're in the south of Ukraine. I mean, they're close to the south of Ukraine. They're close to the strategic port of Odessa, which Putin cannot take. I mean, he wanted to, and incidentally, I think today or yesterday was a horrific missile attack on Odessa. Yeah. It's Ukraine's largest port on the Black Sea, and of course, the lifeline of Ukraine selling grain, which is extremely important for their subsistence, goes through Odessa, and so that's one issue. The other issue, of course, is the so-called Gagauz tiny republic. So in that part of the world, all kinds of miraculous things happened historically. Get this. They are Turkic people, which are Christian. And so remember, this area went back and forth between the Russian Empire, the Turkish Empire, all sorts of things got mixed up, ethnicities, religions, and so on. And so, along with the Transnistria, there's a trouble in Gagauz. The Gagauz were always extremely pro-Russian, largely because, although Moldovans are Orthodox Christians as well, but I guess it was more like an ethnic thing. And the older brother, the great Russian Empire is there. So there's trouble there too. Who knows? I mean, he established the precedent, right, with Donetsk and Luhansk. The Gagauz may say, okay, we're declaring independence and we're asking for assistance from Russia. The problem is that you cannot get to them unless you go through Ukraine. And so it's sticking it to Moldova, but, he cannot, I mean, I don't think he's in any position to open another front in Ukraine. I mean, he has his hands very, very busy with what he has now in southeast Ukraine. I don't think he can go to the southwest. So it is well, first of all, to keep Moldova on its toes, Moldova's been veering more and more to the West. I think part of Putin's deal here is that, you remember with Georgia too, that is, when Georgia came at least, somewhat close to the so-called roadmap to NATO, there was a war, August 2008. And of course, NATO just, with a 10-foot pole would not touch any country where there is a potential for civil conflict. Because Ukraine does, it's in their charter. They don't get involved in inside civil conflicts. So I think this is kind of a shot across the bow. I don't think that there'll be an attack on Moldova. Again, it will have to be done with paratroopers. They have to fly over Ukraine. Yes, Moldova doesn't have any army to speak of. It's the poorest country of Europe. It's probably next to Kosovo, the smallest country in Europe. And so from the military point of view, I don't think it would be, that difficult. But it may not be, how terrorists say there are high-value targets and low-value targets. And Putin is certainly a terrorist. So I think it's I still think it's a low-value target. But it's, like I said, it's a shot across NATO's bow to show that don't you even think about, getting Moldova into NATO.
I want to just piggyback on something that you said, because I was unaware about Moldova's propensity maybe to show the West some love. So because and correct me if I'm wrong, Moldova was one of the countries that came about after the Soviet Union collapse, right? So like, can you talk about Moldova's sort of shifting political climate?
It's interesting. Yes. In fact, there was one of the 15th republics, so-called republics of the Soviet Union. Moldova Soviet Socialist Republic was there. And essentially, it, like all other post-Soviet states, it's recreated itself as an independent state. It was a total mess. It was ruled for a while. It was ruled by literally one oligarch who essentially bought up, radio, TV, and everything else. Always was very pro-Russian. I traveled there 10 years ago, and I was amazed. I didn't hear any Moldovan. Everybody spoke Russian. And of course, most dangerously, or I say most damagingly, the radio and TV were almost all in Russian. And all the Russian television stations and radio stations, which I think they now at least constrained, or maybe like the Baltics, just simply cut off. But little by little, and remember, Moldovans, Stalin created that. There were no Moldovans. There were the province of Moldavia that was part of the Ottoman Empire, which incorporated what now is Romania. They're ethnically, essentially Romanians. Their language is indistinguishable from Romanians. And like I said, Stalin carved it out. If you remember the 1938 Molotov-Ribbentrop, where they divided Eastern Europe or border areas from top to bottom, from the Baltics all the way down. So that part of Romania, not the entire Romania, but that part of Romania, Hitler gave him as a present. And so it became Moldova. So they decided that, but little by little, it's in a way it's a success story, because for all the problems, they did not go the dictatorial route. They did have elections. They did have change of power, and now there's a woman prime minister, who is quite pro-Western and anti-Russian. I think they were also scared. A lot of Moldovans were scared by what happened in Ukraine, and so they started, veering towards the West. The West cannot provide them any assistance and defense at this point, but still, at least symbolically or emotionally. And so here we are. I think they either got the roadmap to the European Union or want to get it. And that's, of course, remember, this is how essentially the revolution, the Maidan revolution, happened in Ukraine. So all of that is, I can't say Putin is losing sleep over it, but it's another kind of slap in the face. And so I think all of these, the Gagauz, the Transnistria, all of this is Putin's pulling the cords and trying to say, okay, you think you're safe? Well, don't get too big for your britches.
just real fast. So, like, I guess one way to know is whether or not in their next election, if Paul Manafort is the campaign manager for one of the opposition, that's how we'll know whether or not it's really bad.
Yeah, that's right.
So, this burning question keeps coming to my head because, so many Americans, I feel like they just don't understand what the threat of Putin and Russia really is. I think they can hear some things, they see some stuff, but we're like, hey, I thought we were in decent, relationship with this country. Why is it all like now it's all crazy and it feels like we're like in this war and that's not a war and it feels like the Cold War again and all these different feelings. Like it's just so hard to even wrap our minds around it. How can we as Americans, like the normal American, help us understand like Putin, what you understand of his psychology? Why is he doing this? What is this even about? Why can't he just be happy with the enormous amount of land he already has in Russia? Like what's going on here? And why is this so important that we're paying attention to this?
All right, Josh. So first of all, you'll have to read my book. It's very short.
I would love to.
It's called Riding the Tiger. And you like the subtitle, Vladimir Putin's Russia and the Uses of War. So a lot of those things are clarified there. The paradox of it, it's worse. Let me start with this. It's worse than the Cold War. And I'll tell you why. Because, there's a famous saying by Clausewitz, war is a continuation of politics by other means. So the Politburo, those dying old men in the Politburo, were all World War II veterans. And whatever, whatever the problem, I grew up with the refrain, "Лишь бы не было войны," anything but the war. I mean, they saw war firsthand. And they were extremely careful. I mean, yes, there were proxies, Cuba, Angola, Ethiopia, of course, Vietnam, but never face to face with the West, with the Americans, right? On the opposite, I mean, Nixon goes to Moscow, we have détente, we have arms control agreements, then Brezhnev, Carter. Yeah, things go up and down, but basically anything but the war. Why? Because they felt very secure. The regime was secure. Yeah, you had food coupons and lines for milk and eggs, but you also had the KGB and fine. I mean, and remember, that is the generation that went through people eating grass. I mean, this is, before, the famous collectivization famine, which killed about 10 million people. Then immediately after World War II, I mean, in other words, both the leaders and the people felt, okay, so long as there's no war, we can live. Now, they also had the ideology. This was the last generation that really believed that, just as Lenin said, and Lenin, of course, citing Marx, the history on their side. All right, so it's a little bit difficult now, but in the end, we're going to win. None of that exists for Putin. He was born in 1952. I mean, what he and those around him, all they remember about the war is a great triumph. It was, we defeated them. And by the way, this is how they celebrate. On the 9th of May, they celebrate the Victory Day. It's amazing. It's totally different from what it was when I grew up. It was, first of all, it was not a big deal. Secondly, just veterans got together, a bit of vodka, remembered the friends. The song in those days called it the holiday with tears in your eyes. I mean, solemn remembrance of 20 million people who died. All of that is gone. Tears are gone. It's a triumph. It's the glorification of Russian art. That's what it became. And in fact, one of the most popular car slogan or a bumper sticker is "Можем повторить." We can do it again. So that is why is that the regime doing this? Because there's no ideology. And what's your legitimacy? For the first two terms, 2004 then 2008, Putin's legitimacy he was extremely lucky. He took over Russia, oil was $18 a barrel. At the end of his second term, it was $140 a barrel. So things started trickling down. Frankly, in Russian history, there was no such prosperity as during those 8 years. Things started getting a little worse, but then came 2012, his third presidency, and it became very clear that because of the structural issues that he was responsible for, corruption, bureaucratization, taking over private enterprise, all sorts of issues that the regime created, they're not going to grow anymore 7-8% a year. And the incomes are not going to go. So where's the legitimacy coming from? And it's not the coincidence that 2 years later he invaded Crimea. And by the way, at the end of 2013, his popularity, and that's essentially synonymous with the regime's legitimacy. There's nothing going for the regime. People hate the regime. They like Putin. Was the lowest ever. It dropped to about 60%. And by the way, for those who think, 60% is great, remember, if you don't have any opposition press, any opposition media, any opposition parties, you can't really fall much below 60%. You're the only one. So it's 60%. He goes to Crimea, it goes to 88% and stays there for several years. So there you are. I mean, things are much more complex, but this is one issue that I wanted to draw your attention to. You say, why can't he just stay where he is? There's another thing, and here it's really fascinating, but it's also scary. I think he joined the club, a very exclusive club of historic figures, where what to you and me seems rational, or rather irrational, to him seems very rational. I always say, why did the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor? What did they expect? That they're going to win a war against the United States? Why did Hitler, before the U.S. joined, before Pearl Harbor, why did Hitler declare a war on the United States? Why did Saddam Hussein attack Iran, a country much larger, with a population of the same Shiite persuasion as half of his population? Why? Well, there's a documentary by a pro-Nazi filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, called "The Triumph of Will." I mean, a scary thing, but it's a beautiful work of documentary art. And I always ask myself, what does that mean? Triumph over what? It's a triumph of will over reality. In other words, I don't care what the reality is. I will mold the reality. And in some cases it works. I mean, he grabbed Crimea. Apparently everybody around him was scared. And they say, don't do it. The West is going to go to... No, he did it. Worked. Hitler, went to Rhineland in the violation of the post-World War I agreements. Again, by the way, we know now that his generals who prepared a coup. At that point, France could have won that war in 3 days. They did nothing. So I do it. I do it against the so-called rationality. You little people, you don't understand. And I think he joined that. Also, remember, you were in power for 24 years, quarter century. I mean, it must go to your head. So these two issues, Putin's personal idea of grandeur. He's not running for the Russian president. He's running for the history books. This is where, he is there. Apparently, he's either Peter the Great or he is Ivan the Terrible. That's who interests him. Apparently, he has very little interest in this sort of mundane matters of Russia. Winning the war, showing that yet again I prevail over what you consider a rationality. I was the one, I don't know if I spoke with you at the time. At the time, I was on the record saying he would never invade Ukraine because it's the second largest country in Europe, very patriotic people. He doesn't have enough army. He doesn't have enough resources. It is madness. It is irrational. He did it. And I always say that I was wrong for the right reasons, meaning it was madness, and it is madness.
Yeah.
And it was irrational. And he is up to his eyebrows in the quagmire, but he did it. And so how do you deal with a guy like this? This to me is very disturbing.
Yeah. How come, it doesn't seem like all these sanctions that we're putting on Russia is slowing him down? Well, maybe they are because he's getting weapons from North Korea or whatever. But it's when you see folks and I'm going to say this somewhat tongue in cheek, you see folks like Tucker Carlson in the grocery store, it's oh, things are so much cheaper here.
Ask somehow Tucker did not mention that the salaries are 1/15 of American salaries. Okay.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Oh,
yeah.
So
the average salary. Yeah.
Yeah. So how come it seems like just, sanctions after sanctions, Navalny death, we put more sanctions, and it doesn't seem like that they are losing any steam. Is part of Russia's calculation just waiting to see who's going to be in office, after this year, and they're just going to keep going full steam ahead? What are your thoughts?
So a couple of things here. Well, first of all, the sanctions on Navalny, or following Navalny's death, they're on individuals. That's a little different. Sanctions are not a bomb, okay? They don't blow things up. My favorite metaphor is that imagine two oxygen hoses that sustain Putin's regime. One goes out, and that's oil, and it brings in money. And the other one brings in technology and, both for civilian and military contraband, dual use, whatever. So I always felt that, sanctions, we're not going to destroy Russia through sanctions in a short run. In a medium run, we are constantly degrading the quality of life, and I could give you examples. And we're making both the war, the conduct of the war, the technology for the war, more and more expensive. Yes, they get it, but they pay the middlemen, they pay smugglers, they pay, as you know, that there is it's called the gray fleet. In other words, the EU and others with it established a $60 cap on insuring cargo ships or oil tankers. In other words, if Russia sells it for more than $60 a barrel, no reputable Western company is going to insure that fleet. They have to find insurance. And of course, nobody insures this. They pay cash to those operators of that fleet, right? India and China are robbing them. They get oil at a tremendous discount, and China also gets Russian gas at a tremendous discount. So that is a subtraction. And by the way, we'll see how that develops. India is beginning to move away from Russian oil. India, until now, has been the largest consumer of the sea-routed Russian oil through tankers. And apparently they're beginning to move away and rely more on the Emirates, on Iraq, and so on. That would be a huge subtraction. That's sanctions for you. The inflation in Russia is 7.5%, and it's going worse. The core products, somehow Tucker did not notice, eggs, bread, and so on, are up 23% compared to the pre-war years. So in other words, yes, they have the money, yes, they have the oil, but it is limited. It is not indefinite. Russia spends an estimated $300 million a day on that war. So it amounts to, about 100 billion, something 100 billion a year. They have it so long as the oil is, by the way, this is another issue. What if the oil goes back to $40 a barrel, which it very well could because China is, as you know, is essentially recession. Yeah. And so long as the U.S. continues to supply most of the liquefied gas to Europe to replace Russian oil, it may very well go down. So all of those things are working. Oh, one more thing I mentioned before we have to go. There have been a huge increase in the airplane accidents in Russia, and the reason for that is because they never had. Well, their own planes are 50, 60 years old. All of the civil aviation, or 90%, was leased from the West. Well, those companies are gone. There's nobody to maintain, and they can't get the parts unless they smuggle them. And once they smuggle them, you've got to have trained mechanics to which used to be those servicing those foreign companies. Fortunately, not yet anything lethal, but several hundred accidents, takeoff, landing in the air. Sooner or later, those planes will start falling from the sky, and that is another way in which the Russians are impacted on it. And the last thing is, like I said, 50,000 soldiers maimed or killed every half a year. So far, Putin compensates the families very generously, but already there is a movement of women who are wives and mothers of the mobilized soldiers who want them back, at least for a vacation or out of Ukraine. And essentially, they were told, no, they're there either till we win or till they die. And so those who say that Russia could sustain this indefinitely are wrong. One last piece of statistics. Together, the United States and the EU have a GDP that is 40 times that of Russia. So let's keep that in mind as well.
Wow. That's awesome.
Unbelievable.
And it's like, we didn't even get a chance to get into like Congress funding or anything like that. But, maybe I'll be a little optimistic. And the next time we talk, Ukraine will get all the money they want. And, Well, remember, Will, all this dithering and all this, ripping of the clothes on one's chest by the Republicans in Congress is about 5% of the Pentagon budget. Not the GDP. I mean, if you talk about American GDP, we're less than 1/10 of 1%. This is what our help to Ukraine. Yeah.
But the 5% of the Pentagon budget, of which at least 3% are going to stay in this country.
Yep.
Because we're going to pay our workers to make weapons for Ukraine. So this is just talking about being a Russian.
Yeah, don't try to convince me using your fancy facts and figures. That won't work on me. But anyways, hey, thank you so much, Leon. This has been a really, really great conversation. I always appreciate just your insight.
And as always, just shoot us the link when you post it.
I will, definitely. And to our listeners, have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
All right, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks.